I feel like I have a good enough story. I'm a New Yorker, but I trained in New England. OVW was one of the best times in my life. Probably one of my best singles matches. Will never really be seen. It was a dark match between myself and Matt Cappotelli. Jim Cornette came up to us and he said, Romeo and Antonio, we're going to call you the Heartbreakers. It's going to be effing great. We ended up working a match with a former New York Yankee pitcher, Joe Ausanio. I said, how about in the middle of a match, we break out into a baseball game? Other Ham on the Street episodes wouldn't be doing this type of stuff. This last one was in the vault for 30 years. I think he's one of the most underrated wrestlers ever. And I have a partially torn pec and a bum knee. And then they go on to tell me, well, you're going to wrestle Ron Killings, and we're going to need you to wrestle at least 20 to 30 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, hosted by Coach C, Chris Sanders, this is Best for Business.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Another episode of Best for Business. I'm pumped for this one. You just wrapped up a career. Romeo Roselli, man, thank you so much for joining me for this one.
Thanks for having me.
So one thing that sparks my interest right off the rip is Kevin Landry. So for you personally, what would you feel are some of the biggest lessons that you learned from him?
Kevin was my first real instructor in wrestling. And when I went to wrestling school, he really took me under his wing. Kevin gave me the foundation, and he ran a really good wrestling school, and I had a lot of talented individuals come out of there.
Who else are some of the people that you started with?
Antonio Thomas, who went on to be my tag team partner, and there's just a lot of good guys in the Northeast, wrestling scene, and up in Massachusetts, Connecticut type of area, that have all done very well, that have all went through that school, and that school was almost I guess started by Paul Roma, of 80s fame, and Paul still looks great and does still great things to this day. There's a lot of good history there.
Now, you started first before wrestling. Was it photography you were into?
Yeah, so at first I just really loved going to wrestling shows and taking pictures, trying to get pictures at ringside, or just going as close as I could to a ring and snapping photos. I ended up getting enough good photos where I said, let me submit them into wrestling magazines, see if I can get them published, and I actually got quite a few published. So I kind of started my wrestling, career there, just by getting my pictures published in various magazines.
Wow. So when you start wrestling, whose idea was it? Yours for Johnny Heartbreaker?
Yeah, I'm not even quite sure how the name came about. But it was just I didn't think it would stick, and it really didn't stick. But yeah, it was just something along the lines of, I look good, and I'm kind of a pretty boy, so a lot of people had the nickname of Johnny for me. So then we just figure, what can we do to put a last name onto that.
So when you look at your career and we talk OVW, not too recently I had on Tank Tolan, and he was telling me about his experience with OVW. But for you, what was like a day in the life of being at OVW with the training?
OVW was one of the best times in my life,
Yeah.
for sure. And I would wake up, have a little breakfast. I would go to the what we call the intermediate class, and I would go to that. And then I would stay for the contract class, which was immediately after that. So roughly, like, the intermediate class was like 8 to 10, and then contract class would be like 10 to 12 or 10 to 1 or something like that. And then from there, maybe go to the gym after that, or before I got signed to a contract, I would go to my job as a waiter.
Wow,
And
yeah.
I would just, wait tables to, make a living and get by. And I would do that, through the evening, and then, go to sleep and wash, rinse, repeat, and, do it all over again. Uh, Fortunately for me, I was lucky that even when I wasn't under contract, I got to participate in the contract class, which made me feel good that I was on the right track, because they
Mhm.
wouldn't let just anybody, work in the contract class without a contract. But even if I wasn't able to do anything in the ring, I would still stay and watch and learn and do as much as I could, and just be around, people that were just really, really good wrestlers and really, really good minds for the business. So I basically just be at OVW as long as the doors would be open, and even on the weekends, on Saturday mornings, they would do like the big quote the beginner class
Mhm.
for the younger guys, and I would go to that as much as I could too, and I would attend that class, and I would just try to soak in as much as I could, and all the house shows that would be on the weekends, like a Saturday, Sunday. I would go to those even if I wasn't booked. I would help set up the ring and take down the ring and do whatever was needed. And then, you know, when they started putting me on the shows, I would work the shows. But in the beginning, I wasn't on the shows. Same thing on, I don't know what night they film now, but Wednesday nights was our OVW TV tapings.
Mhm.
So everything was kind of built up to, being ready, and what would happen on Wednesday night. So sometimes I would be asked to work the show, sometimes I wouldn't. Obviously, once the Heartbreakers came about, then we had something. They had something for us, on a weekly basis. And even before then, just as Romeo Roselli, I was featured, prominently on television before the Heartbreakers came about.
So when you talk about learning, when you look throughout your career, who would you say are like some of your biggest mentors or people you learned the most from?
Since we're talking about OVW, I have to mention Jim Cornette, who's very influential, in helping me, and just creating creating the tag team. He was just great to be around. I have nothing but great things to say. During that time as well, Lance Storm was one of the main uh, trainers down there. Lance was an amazing trainer to everybody. I don't think anybody has ever said a bad thing about Lance Storm
Mhm.
ever. Um, he was just he was fair, but he was tough, and he was smart, and his practices were well thought out, and helpful. And once again, I can't say enough good things about him. Danny Davis was the guy who ran OVW at the time, and he gave me a lot of good opportunities, and he ran a wonderful facility in OVW. So have to mention him, and just even a lot of the veteran wrestlers in OVW, guys like Nova, Mike Bucci,
Oh yeah.
Matt Morgan was there, and he was helpful in the beginning as well. And I'm going to leave out quite a bit of names, but around that time, Bobby Lashley was there, Nick Nemeth was there, Joey Matthews was there, and he was always very helpful to all the talent.
Mhm.
John Morrison was there, and he was always very helpful, and we always had a good, playful camaraderie with who had the better abs, and things like that. So basically everybody that was through the doors of OVW at that time, was a mentor, in one way or another.
Was there a moment or a match from OVW that you said really stands out to you, you think?
Um, to be honest,
Mhm.
um, and I still think this is probably one of my best singles matches, even though it will never really be seen, or never really be talked about, or never really been thought about. It was a dark match between myself and Matt Cappotelli. and
Wow.
Matt Cappotelli was, obviously
Yeah.
amazing performer, and even a better human being. And it was just, it wasn't, a 20-minute, burner match. It was just a nice little, I think we probably went about 8 to 10 minutes, and it was a dark match, so it wasn't even for TV, but the crowd was with it. I felt really good working with him. He was so over as a babyface. I was just coming into my own as a heel. And in regards to OVW, believe it or not, that's one of the matches that I think of. I had a lot of good matches with Ken Doan,
Hmm.
who went on to be Kenny in the Spirit Squad. We were put together quite a bit on TV and on house shows, and we always had a really nice match together. That's probably one of the reasons why we were always put together. And then, I can't go without saying the Heartbreakers versus Eminem. That was some really, really fun matches as well, and working with Morrison and Mercury, two top guys. I am very grateful for the opportunity to work with them.
How did you feel originally when you and Antonio were being thrown together? Because ideally in wrestling, not everyone wants to be a tag team wrestler, but you guys made the most out of it.
Yeah, one day Jim Cornette came up to us and said, Romeo and Antonio, and you're gonna have big red lips on the front of your tights and a big red heart on the back of your tights, and we're gonna call you the Heartbreakers, and we're gonna put you with a manager called Moe Green, and it's going to be called Moe Green and the Heartbreakers, and it's going to be effing great. And we're just kind of like, all right. I mean, who are we to argue against Jim
Yeah.
Cornette? And we said, well, we'll make the best of it. And, okay, Moe Green and the Heartbreakers. And then we said, let's see what we can do with this thing.
How long was Moe Green with you?
Moe Green was with us the entirety of our run at OVW.
Yeah. So when I look at your career, you've got to do some pretty cool things. Another thing I want to ask you about is wrestling in Puerto Rico now. What do you think is one of the things that makes Puerto Rico stand out when it comes to wrestling?
Puerto Rico, man, has some really great fans,
Yeah.
really passionate fans. And I
Yeah.
remember I was there for several months, and my last match there was a loser leaves town match.
Yep.
And I remember like they were throwing stuff at me, and it was like it wasn't dangerous ever, but
Hmm.
I was like, wow, this is what it feels like, to get really, to get real heat, so
Hmm.
to speak, where you got people, throwing things at you and just screaming at you and barely able to get out of the arena. And the fact too that there was a lot of times where the locker rooms were separated, so you didn't even see your opponent until you
Yeah.
got into the ring. So you couldn't even really call anything, until you got in the ring.
That's old school.
Um,
Love it.
yeah, and that was a really cool experience for the fact that, hey, you have the finish of the match, and that's all you got, and
Yeah.
then the rest, and then some of these guys may not even speak very very English very well.
Hmm.
Um, so then that's another thing to consider is, I'm going to go out there and, you know, how easy is it going to be to call this thing, or how complicated or how intricate should we try to make this, or how simple, always go on the simple side.
Yeah.
Um, but that was a really cool experience too, from the fans' point of view and their passion, and also just, having to, kind of call it in the ring, and be in separate locker rooms was a good experience that I didn't really get any other place.
Now, what would you say this was something that stands out about wrestling in Italy? Because Italy doesn't have as much wrestling.
No, but I mean, my blood is
Yeah.
is Italian blood. All my family was born in Italy. My father, my mother's side was born in Italy. So it was very special for me to work there, and the Italian fans, you could say, because there's not a lot of wrestling, they love wrestling even more, and they're
Yeah.
more passionate about it because they don't get it a lot. So when they do get it, they really, really enjoy it. And now with streaming services and everything, it's a lot easier for them to watch wrestling on TV. But the fact that, they get to experience live events, and I got to be a part of a lot of those live events,
Hmm.
is some of the most memorable moments of my career, hands down.
I'm pretty sure it was in Italy. Does anything stand out wrestling Vampiro?
Vampiro was great.
Yeah.
I got to
Not a
work
lot
with
of
the
people
kid.
could say they wrestled him.
Yeah, yeah. I got to wrestle, and I got to wrestle him several times.
Yeah.
And he couldn't have been any nicer. And we had some nice matches, and he ended up dropping the title to me in Palermo, Sicily. In front of close to 10,000 people in a really rocking arena. And after the match, I jumped into the crowd, and they were embracing me, and then went back in the ring and raised the Italian flag up. And it was just something, it was really, really special. And like I said, Vampiro was really, really fun to work with, and he'd be willing to do anything. I was like, hey, I'm gonna climb the scaffold and jump off it and jump on you. He'd be like, okay,
Wow.
so he was really cool.
So when we talk from promotions you wrestled, is there anything that stands out to you? Team with the Young Bucks wrestling for Chikara?
Uh, I mean, that was a super fun match too,
Yeah.
and that was before the Young Bucks really,
Hmm.
were world renowned, so to speak. But you could just tell that they were going to be stars, and they were on the upswing. And I remember, everything that we kind of pitched, they were like, "Yeah, that's a cool idea." I remember, I think, every couple minutes of the match, we would roll out of the ring, and then there was like a chalkboard there, so I was like, let's use the chalkboard, and then we would try to like write our plan on the chalkboard. This is in the middle of the match. And the fans ate it up, and everybody thought it was fun,
Hmm.
the entire match. And Chikara has his own style as it
Yeah.
is. um, so we were able to kind of fit into their style, and it was an 8 man, so there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things to consider.
Hmm.
And Quackenbush was in the match as well. And to me, he's royalty. He was someone that um, was the man when I was first coming up.
Hmm.
And whenever I would do a show, I'd be like, wow, Mike Quackenbush is on this show. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big show. To him, to me, that he was like, one of the guys that, you wanted to be on a show with, because, I would always see him in magazines, and I always hear about him.
Hmm.
And then um, he ended up being a mentor in his own way, where he was just always very kind to me, and always helpful, and always answered my questions. And he's still doing very well to this day. I see
Yeah.
it. I see what he's putting out there in his content. So yeah, I mean, Chikara was fun.
So when we talk about places you wrestle, is there anything specific that stands out wrestling for TNA?
Um, another fun experience. I
Yeah.
mean, we got to work with two guys that we grew up watching on TV,
Mhm.
Road Dogg and Billy Gunn.
Yeah.
Um, and we got to work them actually several times, that also outside of TNA. And I remember one time, um, they came to the ring, and Road Dogg did his little intro, and then we just looked at each other, and we said, "That was awesome." And we're getting to wrestle them. We're getting to work in them, because we used to sit in the crowd, and we used to hear it, and we used to cheer. And now we're performers about to take the leg drop from Billy Gunn, and about
Yeah.
to take the shake, rattle, and roll from
Yeah.
the Road Dogg. And that was really cool that we got to work them, and let alone do it on TNA, and let alone do it on a TNA pay-per-view,
Yeah.
and also do it as we were a surprise mystery opponent.
Nice.
So we got to kind of check that off our bingo card, that we were a surprise opponent on a pay-per-view, which is, not something that just happens, all the time.
Yeah. So I was talking about you not too recently to Big 80s Donnie B, Donnie Bucci,
Mhm.
but I'm curious one thing. Is there anything that stands out when you got to wrestle Trent Acid?
Oh man, Trent was great.
Yeah.
Backseats were great.
Yeah.
Um, and we spent a lot of fun times together in Phoenix Championship Wrestling,
Yep.
and we would also have road trips, and we would also do things together, in like Pittsburgh and other places. I love the Backseats. I love Donnie B. Obviously I mentioned Nova,
Hmm.
Donnie's brother, Mike Bucci, Simon Dean.
Yeah.
For all those guys are great. They were all so helpful, so supportive, and even to this day, we'll do something and then that we'll post, "Hey man, happy for you," or we'll always get a message, "Hey man, good for you, congrats, bro."
Yeah.
Still to this day, and I'm so glad to see the back seats are still going strong in their kind of version of 2.0 with
Yeah.
Johnny Kashmere. But Trent was such an incredible worker, such an incredible talent. And it's a sad story, but we'll always kind of think of the good times with Trent, and it was that was another one, kind of like Quackenbush, where I was coming up, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm on a show with the Backseat Boys. Like
Wow.
to me that was like, wow, the Backseat Boys.
Yeah.
They're so good. They're so popular. I can't possibly match them, or
Yeah.
I hope I go on before them, because if I go on after them, so to me, that was another bunch of names, and another bunch of workers and talent that not only that I respected, but I got to know, and that became colleagues.
Yeah.
And like I said, the Grayson brothers are two guys that used to come to shows that I used to work at, and I remember they would come up to me before at the meet and greets, and they would say, "I want to be a wrestler," and et cetera, et cetera. And you hear that a lot,
Yeah.
but not many people follow up with that. And
Hmm.
then years later, I see them all ripped up and jumping and doing all these amazing things, and now they're still crushing it out there on the independent scene. And I see them doing stuff with the Insane Clown Posse and all
Yeah.
all these other shows, and I'm really happy for them, and I hope they can continue, to do very well, and make a living out of being wrestlers. And there's a lot of ways to make a living out of wrestler these days.
Yeah.
Not just in the big super big companies, but just on the independents as well.
Yeah, they're killing it. JP Grayson texted me the other day. He wanted to be my podcast. I said, "When are you free?" And every weekend they're flying out, so he
Yeah,
can't even make that one happen.
good for them.
So I'm curious about your career, though. I want to ask you about a specific spot. Now, you post a photo annually. Can you walk me through the spot you do? I forgot the exact match. Goldust is a catcher. You're up to bat.
Um, yeah, yeah. So it was an outdoor baseball stadium show, and I'm a big baseball fan. So my wheels would always be turning with, no, not even just for baseball,
Mhm.
but wherever I am, especially if I'm a heel, I would say, how can I use my surroundings, or what can I say um, that's really relevant right now,
Yeah.
either between being in this particular city, or just something. And baseball stadium for me is easy, because I
Yeah.
love baseball, and I'm like, I have to do something baseball related. So we ended up working a match with a former New York Yankee pitcher, Joe Ausanio,
That's insane.
and I said, how about in the middle of a match we break out into a baseball game?
Wow.
And they're like, that's quite the idea.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and I was like, I'll put a bat and a couple balls underneath the ring. Joe's a pitcher, so I was like, Joe, you pitch to me. Goldust will be the catcher, the referee will be the umpire, and it'll be something that's never been done before.
Yeah.
In a business where everything's been done, or what can you do that's different? It's something that I was like, let's just break out a wiffle ball game in the middle of the match.
Wow.
And it's something fun, something that worked. And the other spot I always like to do at baseball stadiums is run the bases. So easy. So
Yeah.
as a heel, I would take something, and then I would go out of the ring, and then I would have the baby face start to chase me, and then I would start to run, but then I would start to run around the bases, and then the baby face would stop chasing me, because why would he just chase me around the bases? But it gave me an excuse to run around the bases on a Major League Baseball or minor
Yeah.
league baseball field. To me, that was fun, because once again, I love I love the sport of baseball and wrestling. So I get to combine both. So that was always fun. Every time there would be a stadium show, I'd be like, yes, I'll do the stadium show, or yes, I get to do a stadium show, because to me that's just fun.
Yeah. So when I look at your resume, you're maybe one of two wrestlers that got to do this. How was your experience doing ham on the street?
No, I am on the street. Yeah, that was fun, and that was
Mhm.
a lot of improv too.
Nice.
So yeah, I mean, we cooked mussels,
Yeah.
and it was mussels for muscles,
Yeah.
and like I said, a lot of it improv. And I remember when I saw the oil that they had to put on the muscles, I was like, oh, this is perfect. So then I'll put oil on my arms,
Yeah.
instead of putting an oil on the actual food itself.
Mhm.
So it was just, once again, like, what can I do? What can we do to make this, number one, obviously entertaining, and number two, to make it different, where, other ham on the street episodes wouldn't be doing this type of stuff, and
Yeah.
this would stand out as something different.
Yeah, so when I was in college this past semester, I was writing a paper, and my teacher knew how much I'm involved with wrestling. So she suggested I can do something on the wrestler, and I'm watching, and I see you all of a sudden. So I popped hard. So for you, how did the opportunity come to be?
The wrestler was a is a long story. I'll try to keep it fairly quick. So at the time, I had a knee injury,
Hmm.
and I I was about to go in for knee surgery, and then they started casting for the wrestler, and then I had to decide, should I go in for the audition, or should I have my knee surgery? And I said, well, I'm going to probably regret the rest of my life, or wonder what
Yeah.
if I had my knee surgery and didn't go on the audition. So I'm the type of person that rolls the dice and just goes for it. So I called up my doctor, and I said, we gotta put off the knee. We gotta put off the knee surgery. I'm gonna go in for this audition. Now, also, what I had to keep in mind is that if I somehow get the role, or get an audition, or get a particular role, I'm probably going to have to wrestle. And how am I going to wrestle if I need knee surgery?
Yeah.
Right? So that's something that I had to consider too. But obviously, I didn't tell the producers that. I didn't tell the production company
Yeah.
that. I didn't tell the director that, because you want the role, you want the movie, and you figure it out along the way.
Hmm.
So then I ended up going on the audition with pretty much a bum knee, and they really liked my audition, so they called me in for a callback, and then I could just tell they were like really, really complimentary, and really, really interested in me. I still remember, and this is something that I thought was really cool. Darren Aronofsky was, the director, and
Yeah.
very well respected in his entertainment business. He goes, man, what are you doing wasting your time with all this wrestling? You should just be doing acting. Um,
Wow.
and it's in a complimentary way.
Hmm.
I was like, wow, that's a really nice compliment from a really good director.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew that I got a shot at getting a role in this movie.
Hmm.
And then I ended up, I was like, okay, well, I got the call. You gotta roll. Awesome. So I was like, and I had about a month before we were going to shoot.
Mhm.
So I was like, I'm going to train my butt off. I'm going to work. I wanted to look as good as I could for being in a movie, right? So I'm going
Yeah.
to train as hard as I could. I'm going to work out as hard as I could. And then what did I end up doing? I ended up partially tearing my pec and on a bench press training just
Wow.
because I was trying to work out, almost too hard.
Mhm.
Um, and now I have a partially torn pec, and I have a partially torn pec and a bum knee, and I not telling the director or the production company any of this,
Yeah.
and then they go on to tell me, well, you're going to wrestle Ron Killings, and we're going to need you to wrestle at least 20 to 30 minutes, and all this is going on in my head. I was like, I don't even know how I can wrestle for 2 minutes,
Mhm.
and at certain points of the match, we're just going to call for a high spot, and then you need to give that to us, and you need to get into it within about 5 to 10 seconds. So no matter where we are in the match, no matter who's on top, no matter what we're doing, like because they had particular camera shots that
Yeah.
they had to cut, they had to make. So that match was very hard to put together because we were just waiting for the cues from the referee to say, okay, we're filming, do a high spot or shoot, do something athletic or
Yeah.
do something off the top ropes or do a flip to the outside or, something like that. All the while, like, how am I going to get through this with a partially torn pec and a no ACL in my knee?
Yeah.
Uh, and I said a lot of prayers,
Yeah.
and I trained as hard as I could after that to try to be as strong as I could. And I just said, man, I just need the world to come together for me for 20 minutes. And I just somehow have to get through this match.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to hold anything back either. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to jump off the top rope. I'm going to do everything that I would want to do in,
Yeah.
for a movie to catch, all this action. And somehow, through the grace of God, I wrestled Ron Killings for probably 25 minutes, and we did every single spot that we were asked for. And then, in the end of the day, they used about 5 seconds of
Yeah.
the wrestling match, and of all things, they used a hip toss.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we're doing flips out of the ring, we're doing superplexes off the top rope, and then they're using a simple hip toss.
Did Ron know that you messed up your knee or your pec or no?
I'm trying to remember. I'm not sure. I may have told him like, "Hey, man, I'm a little banged up.
Okay.
Um, you know, I'll do the best I can, but
Mhm.
let's, make sure that I can get through this match." I mean, but Ron's a pro's pro, so
Yeah.
I had all the faith in him and all the trust in him, and he would definitely hold his end up in the bargain. And I'm really happy to see, everything that he's been able to do. But he had quite a name for himself before then, and
Mhm.
then after the movie too, when he just skyrocketed again.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to ask you about when I was talking to Donnie B, he always says how he applauds the wrestlers who have such a successful life post wrestling. So I'm curious for you, the first thing, when did like guest speaking and things like that come for interest for you? Because I see you do that a lot.
Yeah, it was always something that I wanted to do,
Mm,
because I feel like I have a good enough story, and I feel like I have a good enough way to articulate to individuals who need motivation or who want motivation.
mm,
And that's, I do a lot of speaking at colleges and college campuses, things like that, where, very impressionable, kids,
yeah,
who have a lot of forks in the road, and I tell them, the choices you make dictates the life you lead. And, what you're doing now is setting the stage for excuse me, what you're going to do later on in life. So
yeah,
the hard work you're putting into studying, yeah, I mean, does it really matter if you get a 90 or a 75? In the end, it doesn't really matter. But when you put in the effort to get the 90, that effort's going to translate when you need to go for a job one day and you need to outwork somebody else, or when you get a job one day and you have a big project you have to do and you already have built the work ethic and the perseverance, to get through anything. So, I use a lot of cliches and cheesy quotes, but how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
Um, and I firmly believe that. So, I'm never shy on reaching out to organizations,
Hmm.
to be like, hey, would love to come speak to your students,
Yeah.
or somebody reaching out to me, hey, um, I run a fitness studio in Wyoming.
Hmm.
Could you come do a fitness workshop presentation? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So what's also interesting and that I keep in mind is, I grew up as a very, shy, introverted child.
Wow.
And I used to make up excuses when it was my time to do a presentation in class, as to I'm sick that day, or I didn't feel good, or something
Yeah.
where I was that nervous to speak in front of people. And the fact that now I make a living and I've made a living being in front of people is also part of my story and part of the reason why I like to do what I do.
So when did you gain that confidence, you think?
I really early on when I started wrestling, when I
Okay.
realized that when I can step out of the curtain, I can be a completely different individual.
Nice.
So I don't have to be that shy, introverted kid. I could be the opposite of that. And
Hmm.
and no one will know any different. And everyone will just see Johnny Heartbreaker and just see him as a cocky young little kid. And that's how it all started, where I was like, wow, I just stood in front of several hundred people and I wasn't really that nervous.
Yeah.
And I had no shirt on. I had little tights on. I had
Yeah.
barely any clothes on. And it was
Yeah.
still, I was still able to do it. So yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you, when I was searching for a college, FAU was one of my top options. So for you, when did your involvement with FAU start?
FAU started. It's actually quite an interesting story. So I work with a company called Viper Pro, which is a piece of fitness equipment. It's a big tube with handles, and there's a lot of functional things you can do with it.
Hmm.
Twist it, turn it, lift it, tilt it. Um, and they bought a bunch. FAU bought a bunch,
Hmm.
and but they didn't know how to use it. And they didn't know what to, really how to utilize them in their
Yeah.
programming. So they tried to find somebody who was you know, good enough, I guess, so to speak, to teach them how to use a Viper. And my name ended up getting circulated. And then from there, I say you open the door a little bit, and then I'm going to kick it down. So
Yeah.
from there, it was like, yeah, I could do a Viper workshop, and then I can also speak to your students. And then guess what? I can also do a kettlebell workshop for you. And then I can also speak to your students in another class, or I can do this presentation, or we can do this together. And then fast forward, then they ended up asking me if I wanted to become a graduate teaching assistant and become a teacher uh, part time for them. And then they asked me if I wanted to go back to school to get my master's degree.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? That sounds like a good idea. And it was a good challenge too. It's not that um, I my career was at a point where I was like, I'm not making any money, or I need
Hmm.
this, or it was just a nice compliment and a nice icing on the cake to the fact that I went back to school in my 40s to get a master's degree to hone my craft and to to become an even better fitness educator and trainer than I already was. So I owe a lot to Florida Atlantic University, and I still do a lot of work with them. Like I organize events,
Nice.
and I bring I bring kids out, basketball games and things like that, and I get them on the court. Um, and football games. I organize events for like my daughter's school, and bring them out there. So
Nice.
I have a very good affiliation with FAU, and that's just how I hone relationships, and that's how I like to cultivate relationships. And once I'm confident in the company
Hmm.
and I have trust in the company, whether that's a college or an actual business, then I'm going to do everything I can to work with this company and utilize both of our strengths, right?
Yeah.
Like what can I provide for you? And then how can I utilize your services?
Yeah. So if I knew you were going to be a teacher at FAU, I would have went there automatically. So I see it behind you. I believe that is New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Famer. So when you hear that, what did that mean to you when you got the call?
Yeah, no, that was a nice call
Yeah.
to get, and I, I'm a New Yorker, but I trained in New England. So I went to wrestling school in New England. I
Yeah.
did most of the independents in New England. So I'm kind of a New England guy, even though I'm a New Yorker. So to be considered in anybody's Hall of Fame
Hmm.
is quite the honor. And fortunately for me, this happened right before COVID, so we got to do it, in front of people, and there wasn't any restrictions or anything like that as well. But yeah, that was just a nice little bonus, and it was nice to see some people that I haven't seen in a while too.
How did you go to Northeast Wrestling? What was your first introduction to them?
Northeast Wrestling was always the premier independent company when I first started
Hmm.
being exposed to wrestling in high school and then later on in college. I
Yeah.
mean, the shows that they had, they would draw at least 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000 people, which for an independent show, especially in the '90s and 2000s, was you know was was a big deal.
Yeah.
And they would always have these big names like Northeast Wrestling would always have like Psycho Sid and Rikishi and Bam Bam Bigelow and Jerry the King Lawler, and they would have always all these big names. I was like, wow, this is an awesome organization. And that's when I started the photography thing,
Wow.
and I was like, "Can I take pictures for you?" And I wanted, and I took pictures for Northeast Wrestling, and then I also said like, "Hey, by the way, I want to be a wrestler one day, so just keep me in mind."
Yeah.
Um, and then from there, I ended up training, uh, and then they put me in kind of like a squash match, and then I just kind of worked my way up from there. And I've been working with Northeast Wrestling on and off for the last, let's see, since about 25 years.
Wow. So when you look at your career, when did you decide that Northeast, this is the match that you were going to do? How long was this last one in the vault for, you think?
This last one was in the vault for 30 years.
Yeah.
um, because this was at a building that I grew up watching wrestling in New York. This is you know where I grew up.
Hmm.
And as the story's been told, as much as I've wrestled all over the world and all over the country, and I've wrestled in every major arena, really, that I've ever wanted to, that you could ever wrestle in.
Yeah.
But there was one venue that I never got to wrestle in that was super, super important to me. And that was the Westchester County Center in White Plains, New York. Because that's where for almost 15 years I wouldn't miss a wrestling show there, and I would go there and I would stand outside in the back just to see the wrestlers walk in or try to get a glimpse of them or try to get a picture with them. And that's what made me want to be a wrestler, or just be involved in the wrestling business. um, and I never got to do it, and it burned me for a long time. And I said, well, before I'm done, I want to make sure that I do that venue.
Hmm.
And what better way to do it, than to have that be my final match.
What was the significance of Mike Mondo?
Mike is just somebody that I've known for a really long time.
Nice.
I think he's one of the most underrated wrestlers ever,
Yeah.
to be honest. And he's currently at the top of his game,
Yeah.
and he's wrestling pretty much every weekend. So I knew he's very uh, finely skilled right now.
Hmm.
It's not that he'd be coming off I haven't done a match before that almost a decade, almost 10
Was the
years.
last one Northeast Wrestling too?
The last one was Northeast
Yeah.
Wrestling as well, which was over 8 years ago.
Wow.
So it was almost 8.5 years ago last time I had a match.
Wow.
Um, but Mike, to him, that's just, yeah, he wrestled the week before, he's wrestling the week after.
Yeah.
And I just knew that he would give me, a really great match, and he did.
Wow. I want to thank you for joining me. However, I've ended every interview the same now. Pro wrestling retirements, those don't really exist. However, the day you decide it's all done in pro wrestling, what do you want your legacy to be in pro wrestling?
Oh man, that's a great question. And I will say that yes, retirements in pro wrestling, usually don't last very long. And just so we're all aware. Within the next month or so, I'm going to be kind of announcing, why I've decided to retire at this point,
Mm,
or a lot of people are questioning, like, it sure looks like you can still do this.
yeah.
Like, why do you want to stop? And there's a very significant reason for that, that I'm going to be, disclosing, within the
Nice.
next month, as to why. And if that reason ends up becoming not as much of an issue, where maybe I'd feel like I could potentially, do this for a little bit longer, then, that's another, conversation that I have to have with myself.
Yeah.
But just, figure I'd address that. My legacy is, I guess it would be that, and there's a lot of people in my position who can say, I grew up and a lot of people didn't think I would do it. And I was told that I couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And a lot of people laughed at me, and a lot of people didn't believe in me. And I believed in myself. And, you hear that expression, I bet on myself. And, I didn't have anybody really helping me along the way. Everybody that helped me along the way was something that I've created, something that I cultivated.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm proud of the fact that I made a living and made a fairly small name out of myself, and out of a career, from somebody that wasn't very athletic growing up, was told that I couldn't do it, and just worked really, really hard. I, I got I got to where I've gotten in my career, in my life,
Yeah.
with my heart, not with my muscles, not
Mhm.
with my talent. Because there's plenty of other wrestlers that I idolize, that even that I've wrestled, that are so much more talented than me, are
Yeah.
so much more better athletes than me. But when it came to work ethic, when it came to heart, no one could out heart me, so to speak.
Nice.
And I tried to make sure no one could outwork me, so to speak. So I guess when you talk about me or talk about my legacy, one day or now, it would be that.
Yeah. I want to thank you for joining me. I actually reached out to people from Northeast Wrestling. I was like, yo, do you think he'll do my pod? And everyone's like, yo, he was one of the best. So, man, thank you so much for doing this.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Now, real quick, you're a baseball guy. You a Mets fan too?
I am a big Mets fan,
Now,
yes.
I'm a Mets fan. My dad's a Red Sox. My mom's the Yankees. Now, do you think we have a shot this year, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a shot. Soto's got to, I don't know what he's got to do, but he's got to look a little happier, and he's got to get on the right track. But the fact that the Mets are doing so well and he's not on the right track
Yeah.
is a good sign. But the Dodgers are also, the premier team.
Yeah.
So eventually someone's got to chop them down.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you everybody for watching this episode. This was Best for Business.
Thank you for watching this episode of Best for Business. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, because this is Best for Business.